The Whispering Shadows Part 1, The Uninvited Guest. A group of 5 friends, Mark, Sarah, Jason, Lily, and Ethan, decided to take a road trip through the dense, fog-covered woods of Hollowbrook. They were looking for a secluded cabin to spend the weekend. As they drove deeper into the forest, the trees grew thicker, blocking the sunlight. After hours of driving, they found a small, run-down cabin. "It's perfect," Mark said, trying to sound optimistic. But as soon as they entered, the air felt heavy. The floor creaked under their feet, and the wind outside howled through the cracks in the walls. Ethan, the skeptic of the group, brushed it off. "Old places creak. Let's just unpack." That night, as the group gathered around the fireplace, they began to hear faint whispers. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the whispers seemed to call their names. Mark stood up, trying to locate the source, but the sound faded away. The room was cold, the fire flickering as though something was watching them. Part 2, The Midnight Visitors. The next night, the whispers grew louder. At exactly midnight, the door to the cabin creaked open on its own. Everyone jumped to their feet in alarm. No one had gone outside, and the windows were shut. Jason grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, but he saw nothing except for the dense mist rolling in from the woods. He returned to the cabin, but the strange sensation in the air was growing stronger. Sarah noticed something on the floor, footprints. The tracks were too large to be from any of them, and they led to the basement door. "We need to leave," Lily whispered, but the others were too frightened to move. Suddenly, the whispering came back, but this time it was clearer. "You're not alone." Part 3, Secrets in the Basement. The next morning, everyone was exhausted. No one had slept the entire night, and the tension was unbearable. Ethan finally decided to face whatever was happening. He opened the basement door and descended into the dark, damp room. The others hesitated but followed him down. The basement was filled with old furniture and strange objects covered in dust. But in the far corner, they found something disturbing, a series of old photographs, each one showing a person who looked eerily familiar. In every picture, a dark shadow loomed behind the person. "Who are these people?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them. The whispers returned, now screaming in their ears. The shadows in the photograph seemed to move, and the friends felt a cold hand on their backs. Part 4, The Awakening. As the group desperately tried to escape the basement, they realized the whispers were not just voices, they were coming from the shadows themselves. The figures in the photographs began to step out of their frames, their eyes glowing red. The shadows stretched and twisted, taking on the shape of people. Lily screamed, "They're alive!" The figures started to approach them, their dark forms bending and contorting unnaturally. Ethan grabbed a broken chair leg to defend himself, but it passed right through the shadows as though they weren't even real. The shadows closed in, surrounding them. The air grew suffocatingly cold. Sarah felt a presence behind her, and when she turned around, there was a shadow standing right in front of her. Its mouth opened, whispering, "You've awakened us." Part 5, The Final Stand. The friends ran for their lives, bursting out of the cabin and into the forest, but the shadows followed, lingering just out of sight. Mark, Jason, and Ethan managed to break through the mist and reach the road, but when they turned around, the cabin was gone. It had vanished, leaving only the dense trees and the thick fog. They made their way to the nearest town, but when they asked the locals about the cabin, the response was chilling. "The Hollowbrook cabin has been abandoned for decades. No one dares go near it." Those who did were never seen again. The whispers still echo in the wind when they pass through the forest, and the shadows are waiting, patiently, for the next unwitting visitors. Part 6, The Forgotten Souls. After their terrifying escape, Mark, Sarah, Jason, and Ethan tried to move on with their lives, but they couldn't shake off the haunting memories of that night. No matter how hard they tried to forget, the whispers followed them. They'd hear them when they were alone, during quiet moments, in the middle of crowded places. It was as if the shadows had attached themselves to their very souls. One evening, Sarah was alone at home when the lights flickered. Her heart raced, and a cold draft filled the room. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind, but then she heard it, a voice whispering her name. She turned around and saw a dark figure standing in the corner of the room, its glowing eyes staring into hers. "Sarah," the figure whispered, "you cannot escape." Terrified, she ran out of her house, but the figure followed. She didn't know where to go, so she reached out to the only people who might understand, her friends. Part 7, The Return to Hollowbrook. The 4 friends reunited, now more determined than ever to find answers. They knew they had to go back to Hollowbrook and face whatever evil had cursed them. This time, they were not just going to run, they were going to confront the shadows and break the curse, no matter the cost. They drove through the woods once more, the air growing heavier with every mile. As they approached the spot where the cabin had once stood, they noticed something strange, a dilapidated building in the distance, hidden behind a thick curtain of fog. It was the cabin, but it looked different, darker, more sinister, like something out of a nightmare. Without hesitation, they stepped out of the car and made their way to the cabin. As they approached the door, it creaked open on its own, inviting them inside. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps. Part 8, The Truth Behind the Shadows. Inside the cabin, they found more photographs, but these were different. Each one depicted people who had lived there over the years, some happy, some terrified. But in each image, a shadow stood behind them, growing darker with time. They realized the truth. The cabin was not just haunted by spirits, it was a prison, built to trap the souls of those who entered it. The shadows were not mere ghosts, they were the souls of the cabin's previous victims, twisted and corrupted over time. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room. "You cannot leave. You are part of us now." The shadows began to materialize in the corners of the room, each one reaching toward the group. Mark, Sarah, Jason, and Ethan had no choice but to fight for their lives. They had to break the curse, or they would become like the others, forever trapped in the dark, whispering shadows. Part 9, The Final Sacrifice. The group searched the cabin for a way to break the curse. Finally, they discovered an old, dusty journal hidden under the floorboards. The journal belonged to the cabin's original owner, a man named Samuel Holloway, who had practiced dark rituals in an attempt to gain eternal life. In his quest for immortality, he had trapped the souls of those who entered his cabin, using them to fuel his twisted magic. To destroy the curse, they had to perform a ritual, a sacrifice that would require one of them to give up their life to free the others. But the ritual had a catch: the soul of the one who sacrificed themselves would be consumed by the shadows, forever part of the dark force they had been fighting. Mark, determined to end the nightmare, volunteered. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. "It's the only way to save you all." With a heavy heart, his friends tried to stop him, but it was too late. Mark began the ritual, and the shadows swarmed around him. As he chanted the incantation, the dark force tried to pull him into its depths, but with one final, desperate push, he completed the spell. The shadows screamed in rage as they were torn apart, the souls of the trapped victims finally freed. The cabin began to shake, and with a violent tremor, it collapsed into the ground, disappearing into the earth. Part 10, The Aftermath. The group stood in the ruins of the cabin, their hearts heavy with the loss of their friend. The forest around them seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the last remnants of the curse faded away. They left Hollowbrook for good, but Mark's sacrifice stayed with them. They knew they would never forget what happened in that cursed place. Though the whispers had stopped, they couldn't shake the feeling that something still lingered in the air, a presence that would forever watch over them. As they drove away, the fog began to roll in once more. But this time, it was different. It felt like the shadows had finally been put to rest. A few months had passed since the fall of the Hollowbrook cabin. Mark's sacrifice was still fresh in the minds of his friends, but they tried to move on. Life had returned to normal, or so it seemed. But the whispers, the soft, haunting whispers that had once driven them mad, had started again. At first, it was subtle. Sarah would hear them when she was alone in her apartment. Jason, while studying, thought he saw dark shapes moving in the corner of his eye. And Ethan began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing Mark's voice calling him from the distance. Ethan, it was a voice full of anguish, calling out, reaching through the darkness. When the whispers came again, they couldn't ignore it. They gathered together, deciding that they needed to find out the truth once and for all. The journey back to Hollowbrook had not broken the curse. No, the darkness had followed them, and it was as if the shadows had just been waiting for the right moment to strike again. Part 12, The Shadowed Road. Determined to end the torment, the four friends set out once again for the cursed woods of Hollowbrook. This time, they drove in silence, the weight of their past experiences making every mile heavier. As they neared the forest, the familiar fog began to form, like an old friend coming to greet them. But there was something different about this fog. It seemed more alive, almost as if it were aware of their presence. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers trying to reach out and grab them. As they drove deeper into the forest, the road became narrow, and the air grew thick with unease. "I don't know about this," Lily said, her voice shaking. "We have to do this," Sarah said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "We can't keep running." The moment they stepped out of the car, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't in their heads. They could hear the voices clearly, swirling in the air, moving through the trees. "Help us! Join us! The group froze. The voices didn't belong to any of them. They were different. Too many. Too foreign. Part 13. At the heart of darkness, at the heart of the forest, the friends came upon the site where the cabin had once stood. But now, there was nothing, just the faint outline of its foundation and the remnants of broken stone. Yet, something was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This is it. This is where it all began. Suddenly, the ground shook beneath their feet. The whispers grew louder, and a dark figure rose from the earth. It was no longer a shadow, but something more substantial, something that could be seen, felt, and heard. It was a monstrous form, a swirling mass of darkness with glowing red eyes, reaching for them with tendrils of black smoke. Samuel Holloway, Sarah whispered, realizing that the cursed owner of the cabin had never truly died. The evil that Mark had sacrificed himself to destroy had somehow endured, feeding on their fear, their sorrow, their memories. "We have to stop it," Jason said, fear gripping him.